A huge part of egg cookery is learning how to make egg foams and also learning how to temper. So we're going to begin by making creme anglaise. You start by separating your eggs, and I use my hands, especially with older eggs that are not very fresh because the yolks are sensitive and may break. The next step is to put the milk and cream on the stove and get the milk to a scald. A scald is when you see steam. It'll happen just before the boiling point. Next, we're going to combine the sugar, the salt, and the egg yolks and stir those together real well. So when we temper, we're taking something cold and something hot and bringing them together to equalize the temperature. So adding that sugar should help to protect the egg yolks a little bit. Now when you begin tempering, you're going to add about a tablespoon of hot milk to the eggs and stir it up right away. Don't delay. Then add another little bit more, stir that in, and you're going to continue this process until about half of your milk mixture has been added, and then you can probably go ahead and add the remainder of the milk or add it a little bit faster because you've brought up the heat temperature of those eggs to a point where they're not going to scramble now. So once all the milk is combined, we're going to put it over a double boiler and stir it until it becomes nappe, or thick enough to coat the back of a spoon, which you'll see in a second. So it's probably going to take about 10 minutes to get to that point. Now that it's thickened up, I'm going to show you what it looks like on a wooden spoon because it's easiest to see that way. So when you draw your finger down the back of the spoon, it should stay. So now that it's thick enough, I've got it over an ice bath where I'm going to add my vanilla extract, which is alcohol based. So you want to add that away from the heat, otherwise the flavor will disappear when you cook it. So chill that down. Quicker is better so that you don't get any bacteria growing in there. And then we're going to strain it through a fine sieve to catch any possible curdling that may have occurred, even though we used the double boiler, which is extra protection. You actually don't have to use a double boiler, but I do it anyway because I don't want any more curdling than that. So now we're going to start our souffle. So we're adding the butter to the pan, and I'm going to cook down that butter to get some of the moisture out of it, and then add our flour. Now this is a roux, and to make the base for a souffle, you have to have a bechamel. So that means we're going to have a roux, and we're going to add some milk to it, and it's going to be very thick. So I'm going to cook this roux. I don't want to add too much color. I want it to be white still, but I want it to cook a little bit. So once it's cooked, probably 5 minutes or so, we're going to start to add our milk and whisk that in, and it's going to be a very thick bechamel sauce, or paste rather. So once the base is made, this bechamel paste, you need to think about the flavoring for your souffle. It could be chocolate chips or white chocolate chips. It could be a fruit puree. You can get creative here, and you'll have to just figure out how much to use based on taste. So I am going to use white chocolate today, and I'm going to stir that into my hot base and let it melt. So while my base cools down, I'm going to start my meringue. You need to make sure that there's no egg yolk in your whites and there's no fat on any of your utensils, because if there is, they will not foam. So I need to get this to a medium peak. It's going to be a glossy meringue, and you'll know that you've gone too far if it looks dry. So, you will have to watch for that. It takes practice. So when I start to get some foam action happening like I am here, it's time to add a little bit of sugar. So you can just sprinkle some of the sugar in, whip it up, and then we'll come back and add more as we go. You don't want to add all of your sugar at once because it weighs down the mixture and it makes it hard for it to incorporate more air. So if you add all your sugar at once, you might not get as much air into your meringue as you potentially could. When the meringue starts to hold the shape of the mixer as it runs through it, it's time to start testing for your peak stage. So right now we're at a soft peak. It's falling off of the whip. It's not holding any sort of shape. When we do a medium peak, we want the peak to just drape over but stay on the whisk. And a stiff peak would stick straight up and it wouldn't move much at all. Now beyond a stiff peak, it's going to get really dry and it's going to start to lose its shape. So this is a medium peak. It folds over and it stays put. That's exactly what we want. Now we're going to take our yolks and add it to the cooled base. Make sure that the pot is not warm at all, because if you have curdling here, you're going to have major problems down the road. This is not something that's easily strained out because it's already very thick. So just mix that in. It's going to look really glossy because of the added fat from the chocolate and also the egg yolks. I'm going to transfer this base to a bowl so it's easier to work with. And when you're adding egg whites, you need to first add 1/3 of the mixture. That we're going to sacrifice some of the air by just stirring that in to lighten the base. And then we're going to fold in another third and then the final third. So it's always a 3-stage process when you're adding a meringue or an egg white or even a whipped cream to a mousse. So when you fold in, you cut down the center and you fold over. And it's okay if you still have some white streaks of meringue in there because you don't want to take all the air out. It's not going to make a difference if there are white streaks that are not completely mixed in. So don't get all OCD about it. So fold in the last third of meringue, and then we are going to take care of our ramekins for baking. The ramekins need to be buttered and then sugared, and that sugar is going to help the souffle climb up the edges of the bowl and stay put so that it's nice and high when you bring it out of the oven and doesn't fall immediately. So I'm going to add some sugar to one bowl, and then I'm going to just spin it around while I let it fall into the next bowl. And I'll just continue until all 4 of them are done. A traditional ramekin will have straight edges up until the top, and then there's going to be a little lip. And that lip that's there is also going to help the souffle from falling. But I don't have any, so I'm using my custard bowls, and they'll work just about the same way, but I won't have the height that I would with traditional ramekins. But at school you'll be using ramekins, and you should have a very nice tall souffle. So I'm going to portion the souffle into the cups, and I'm filling them almost all the way up. So I want it to be tall. You want to take a souffle out of the oven and have it sitting at least an inch higher than the top of the bowl. So once all the batter is distributed, move the ramekins or custard bowls onto a sheet tray so that just in case there's any overflow, it'll catch it and it won't burn in your oven. These took about 20 minutes in my oven, and you can see how nice and tall they got. When you go to serve them, you serve with Creme Anglaise, which is English sauce, the vanilla sauce. And to eat it, you make a hole in the center of the souffle and you pour the sauce in the center. It'll help cool it down and it'll add some needed moisture because the souffle does get slightly dry. So it's very yummy. Enjoy.